They handed me a crystal plaque the night they decided I was no longer necessary. It caught the chandelier light perfectly, my name etched in silver beneath the words visionary leadership. The room stood and applauded. Investors smiled. Cameras flashed. And in that moment, while the clapping echoed across the ballroom in London, I understood something chilling. This wasn't gratitude. It was positioning. A ceremonial farewell wrapped in flattery. So I smiled for the cameras and chose not to fight them. I chose to outthink them. My name is Victoria Hale, and I built the risk architecture that kept Ashbourne Capital alive after the markets nearly destroyed us a decade ago. When volatility wiped out firms twice our size, it was my modeling system that stabilized exposure. When American expansion felt impossible, it was my compliance framework that opened New York without regulatory disaster. I wasn't loud. I wasn't flashy. But I was foundational. And foundational is useful. Until someone ambitious decides foundations can be replaced. That someone was Adrian Keller. Recruited from Chicago. Polished. Media-friendly. Aggressively modern. Investors adored his confidence. The board adored his growth projections. Slowly I began to notice rooms closing before I arrived. Calendar invites omitted. Strategy decks finalized without my review. My voting weight reduced in small percentages under the excuse of streamlined agility. No confrontation. No accusation. Just structural erosion. Then came the language shift. I was described as risk-aware in a tone that meant risk-averse. My caution reframed as hesitation. My objections labeled emotional attachment to outdated frameworks. Emotional, the word used when they can't question your intelligence directly. Meanwhile, Adrian accelerated a new international infrastructure fund tied to energy corridors in politically unstable regions. The returns dazzled. The timelines were rushed. Due diligence was compressed beyond what I considered responsible. I raised concerns about leverage stacking and sovereign exposure. The board thanked me for my perspective and moved forward. 3 weeks before the award dinner, I was removed from final approval authority on that fund. They expected resistance. Said I prepared. Years earlier, after surviving a catastrophic quarter, I negotiated a dormant governance clause into our compliance structure. It required an automatic third-party audit if volatility exposure exceeded updated internal thresholds. Thresholds are adjustable. Markets had grown more unstable. I updated the volatility metrics within policy. Documented. Time-stamped. Approved in routine review. The new fund exceeded the threshold instantly. I waited. Waiting is uncomfortable for people who crave confrontation. Silence makes them reckless. And recklessness leaves fingerprints. In the weeks leading to the summit, I watched Adrian grow bolder. He began promising accelerated returns in private investor dinners. He hinted at first-mover advantages. He dismissed geopolitical instability as background noise. The board, seduced by momentum, leaned forward instead of asking harder questions. But momentum without control is simply speed toward a cliff. The Global Investor Summit in New York was approaching, live-streamed to stakeholders across London and the United States. Adrian would unveil the fund as our boldest move yet. The night before, they handed me my plaque. I went home, placed it carefully on my desk, and opened my laptop. If I triggered the audit quietly, it could be contained. If I triggered it publicly, transparency would be mandatory. The next morning, Adrian stood beneath a massive screen projecting expansion maps and projected yields. Applause filled the room as he spoke about decisive leadership. When he announced allocations would close by end of day, I raised my hand. Calmly, I asked for confirmation that exposure ratios remained compliant under Clause 11.7, the clause no one remembered. He assured the room everything was vetted. So I opened the compliance dashboard and activated the trigger. The notification appeared instantly across the internal system and to subscribed institutional stakeholders. Independent risk audit initiated. The atmosphere shifted. Phones lit up. Whispers replaced applause. Questions surfaced from the front rows. What had changed? Why initiate review during launch? Then the second layer unfolded. Months earlier, I had commissioned a geopolitical risk assessment through a Boston advisory firm. The findings weren't catastrophic, but they revealed unstable collateral structures and currency vulnerability tied to upcoming elections abroad. Because the compliance trigger required disclosure of related documentation, the report had to be presented. Live. Slide by slide. No accusation. No theatrics. Just data. Adrian's confidence fractured. Board members exchanged tight glances. Fund managers recalculated exposure on their screens. No one accused him of misconduct. But instability terrifies capital. Within days, allocations paused. The board convened emergency review. Adrian called it sabotage. I called it governance. Every action I took existed within policy. Every adjustment documented weeks earlier. The audit confirmed aggressive leverage dependent on best-case geopolitical scenarios. Impressive on paper. Dangerous in reality. The board recalibrated. The fund was restructured under stricter collateral terms. Exposure caps lowered. Oversight committees reinstated. The proposal to dilute my authority quietly withdrawn. Adrian resigned citing strategic divergence. They offered me the CEO position with full public correction. I declined the optics. I negotiated structural permanence. Dual signature requirements for high-volatility instruments. Mandatory transparency dashboards. Automatic review triggers that could not be overridden without unanimous consent. 6 months later, expansion into the U.S. stood on safer architecture. Investor trust deepened. Valuation rose, not from speed but from discipline. A director later asked why I hadn't warned Adrian sooner. I told him the truth. I did. He mistook restraint for weakness. That is the costliest error in corporate power. When a woman stops arguing, people assume surrender. What they miss is preparation. The crystal plaque still sits in my office. Not as validation. As evidence. They thought they were easing me out with applause. Instead, they reminded me where leverage lives. Not in titles. Not in charisma. Not in volume. Leverage lives in structure. And when you understand the structure, you don't need revenge that shouts. You adjust one line. And let gravity handle the rest.